Yep, you sound good.
Perfect. Okay, see you guys in a bit.
Can everyone hear and see us well?
We can, Lily.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction of who we have in the room today, specifically those who will be talking to you. So my name is Lily Ward. I'm a program specialist with the State Office of Homeless Services within Department of Workforce Services. And I have been helping Russell Goodman, the program manager over HOME-ARP funds, to kind of get the ball rolling with the funds. Russell, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Russell, like Lily said, program manager for this and some of our other affordable housing funding. I'm excited to talk about the non-congregate shelter acquisition funding we have.
I'm Amy Lowe. I am a contract analyst with the Department of Workforce Services. I'm here to talk about how to actually apply for the grant, kind of the pieces of that. And then as we go down the line, I will be the one helping put the grant agreements together. So happy to be here and thanks for having me.
Okay, perfect. All right. So today we are going to be talking about the HOME-ARP pot of money regarding the non-congregate shelters or shelter acquisition. Before we get started though, I wanted to go over some quick housekeeping items. We ask that you please update your name in Zoom. So there's a top in the top right hand corner of your profile, there's 3 little dots. And you can rename yourself. We just ask that you use your first and last name and then in parentheses your organization that you're affiliated with, just because we have to keep roll. And then because most of our attendees are attending online, we will be making use of the Q&A function. So if you have any questions that you would like to be asked throughout, you can either raise your hand or put it in the Q&A function, and then we'll get to those. And then lastly, this meeting is, well, it is recorded, right? Yes. This meeting is being recorded and it will be uploaded in several spots, one of which is the RFGA website, which you kind of found all of this information housed on. So without further ado, we're going to kind of go ahead and get started. This is our agenda today. So you can see we have lots to cover. We will be taking questions throughout, but we also have reserved some time at the end of the presentation to talk about questions. All right, go ahead, Russell.
Perfect. Thank you, Lily. So the first thing is just to orient everyone to the funding we're talking about. So this is called HOME-ARP. It is different than traditional home, which you may be familiar with. This is through the American Rescue Plan. And this is funding for a group of people that Lily will be going over that work, within our office's realm of homelessness. And this funding does different types of activities that traditional home does not. So you'll notice non-congregate shelter acquisition is not something home does. It's a big part of HOME-ARP. So that's why we're talking about it today. If you wanted to read the full statute, it's HUD CPD Notice 2110, and that goes over everything we'll be talking about today in real detail. We're hoping today just to do some broad strokes, give you an idea for what this funding is, and see if it's going to be a good fit for your organization. The total amount of money we received here at the state was $12.9 million, and we, through our allocation process, decided that little over 5.8 would be dedicated to acquisition and development of non-congregate shelter. This is not a set in stone allocation plan. We can adjust amounts as needed during the process or later in the year. This is our initial guess for what is the best amount of money in these different pots based on all our conversations with providers across the state. We are giving priority to areas that aren't receiving home funds or HOME-ARP funds. So the areas that do have the funds are Ogden, Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, Provo. So those areas are still eligible. You're still welcome to put it in application, but we will be trying to look at projects that are in some of these other areas of the state that don't have access to this money and don't traditionally have access to this money. So very excited about this process. Any questions on that? Okay, if not, turn it back to Lily.
Sweet, so I'll be going over the application, kind of just giving you all a quick overview of what you can expect. So here we have listed out the grant description, just a quick snapshot. So HOME-ARP funds may be used to acquire, rehabilitate or construct non-congregate shelter units to serve qualifying populations, which I'll talk about in a moment here. And then I just wanted to put a quick plug for our fact sheet that HUD put out on this website here. You can see I've hyperlinked it. And again, this will be accessible to you after the presentation. But this is a really good resource for you that I'll kind of walk you through on in a minute. And then the next kind of key description item of non-congregate shelter acquisition funds are that supportive service case management plans really must be approved by DWS and Office of Homeless Service staff on an annual basis or as requested by our office. And they really must reflect the needs of clients being assisted and the overall needs of what you're seeing in the community. And then just required wording here in red on the bottom of the presentation slide is that failure to provide supportive services as outlined in the supportive service case management plan and project application during the compliance period may result in repayment of funds. This isn't there to scare you, it's just helpful to know. And just to reiterate, we're here throughout the process and we're here to support you. And then lastly, failure to maintain these supportive services and operate as a non-congregate emergency shelter for the compliance period may also require that repayment of funds. So this slide will cover kind of the populations that can be served, the qualifying populations of the HOME-ARP non-congregate pot of money. So as you can see, there are 5 different population types. So, and outlined within each of these 5 populations is the associated code or policy that it's with. So as you can see, the first one is associated with 103A of the McKinley-Vito Homeless Assistance Act. So that can be a helpful resource as you're kind of determining which qualifying population your project may serve. So generally put though, the qualifying populations are individuals or families that are homeless, at risk of homelessness, fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual stalking, or human trafficking. Those part of other populations where providing supportive services or assistance would prevent a family's homelessness or would serve those at risk of homelessness or housing instability. And then lastly, veterans and families that include a veteran family member that meet one of the 4 criteria noted above. Next, I wanted to just provide you guys with a quick snapshot of the timeline and kind of due dates for y'all. So the first one is December 2nd at 5 p.m. And this is where your letter of intent is due. And Amy will talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then the next one is December 19th. So that's where everything is going to be due to us online. And then the budget will be emailed. Again, Amy will go over that. And then January 2023 is our anticipated grant award date. And then the last one is February 1st of 2023 is where we're anticipating the award will be effective. All right, so in terms of program services, non-congregate emergency shelter services need to fund the effort for acquiring, rehabilitating, or constructing those non-congregate shelter units to serve qualifying populations as outlined in your application. And you also must provide appropriate housing support services to those in housing units whose construction was funded by the project. And then again, here we have just the quick required wording where it's just basically the failure to maintain these supportive services or the affordability for the length of time outlined in the application and approved by the Utah Homeless Council, which we'll refer to as UHC, may require those repayment of funds. Next is kind of just a quick snapshot of the minimum requirements. There will be more kind of outlined in attachment B, the scope of work, which you can see is number 4 there. But generally, the project must be within the state of Utah. You have to serve qualifying populations as outlined on the RFGA packet and the ones that I just went over. And then we also require that you comply with the HOME-ARP investment partnership programs outlined in CFR Part 92, and then HUD Notice CPD 2110 that Russell just mentioned. And then these are additional requirements, again, noted in the RFGA packet. And these aren't to scare you away. Again, we're here to support you throughout the process. But I just wanted to highlight that these are requirements on part of a grantee. And so, for example, we require all of our grantees to be aligned with and support the Utah Homeless Council strategic plan. You have to be involved in the continuum of care and legal homeless council activities and policies and procedures. We require you to be involved in the annual point in time count, as well as a housing inventory count. Then 5th, we require that grantees engage in data initiatives as requested by our office, as well as those that are federally mandated. And then lastly, any expected measurements and outcomes outlined in the packet and the contract with DWS OHS. So that might most likely will be kind of reporting requirements through HMIS. All right, perfect. Russell, do you want to take over reporting?
So for these funds, we will have reporting and things we expect of you as a grantee. So quarterly and annually, we will have you report on the number of clients served. And then we'll also decide some measures based on your specific project, where it's located, how many people you're serving, the type of emergency shelter you're providing, things like that. So we will have some specific measures, and we will expect, like we said, quarterly and annual reporting for those. And for these projects specifically, almost all of them will be participating in the Utah Homelessness Management Information System, or if you're a domestic violence partner in a similar database, and we will coordinate with you to make sure you're aware of that, teach you how to use the system if you've never used it before, and make sure we're getting the right data into that. And we'll also have some measures for the nonprofit capacity funding that we'll discuss at the end of this presentation. That is a different pot of money for nonprofits that they have access to, that is optional to be applied for, and that'll have its own set of measures. So as part of this funding, you do need to complete the project and receive a certificate of occupancy according to the schedule you put in your application. If we need to adjust that schedule, totally fine, and we'll discuss it with you, but we need to make sure it's in writing, it's communicated to us, and that we're following it, whatever we adjust it to be. We know construction can be difficult, can be a little bit harder than you initially anticipate, so we'll work with you on that, but we do need to have a solid schedule outlined. And then you must have the property fully occupied by the qualifying population. And this is kind of a weird one for emergency shelter, but we do need to know that it's up and running. People are staying in the shelter and they're doing it within a reasonable amount of time. So you have all the beds available that you said you would, and that the property is fully running for emergency shelter. And we'll verify that as part of the contract monitoring. And you will also have to participate in ongoing monitoring. There is a period of performance for this where it has to maintain being a emergency shelter. And there's some options to transition that to a housing project at the end, but there's a long period where it has to stay shelter. So we'll be verifying that with you. And if you're trying to change it into a affordable housing at the end, we'll verify that with you and work with you on that. So just to recap, this is funded by HOME-ARP, which is a federal funding source that is different from HOME. We will be doing grant awards from February 1st to June 30th. So February 2023, June 30th, 2024. We will award these grants based on the application, the criteria that we've outlined, and the availability of funding. When you're done with this, we expect that money to come back to us. It won't be a perpetual, we award you this money you don't use it by then and you still have more time to use it, we will ask for it back on June 30th of 2024. And then this concept at the bottom is for any federal funding. So if you're familiar with different federal grants, this funding can't supplant existing funding. So if you're already using money to support a shelter project, or you already have staff that are supported by a different funding source to do this work, this needs to be capacity building, not replacing existing work. So just keep that in mind as well. Like we said, this is a competitive grant process and all grants will be evaluated on a competitive basis. You can submit more than one application, but we do ask that every single agency that submits an application, they do a separate one for each project. And during the review process, so you've submitted your application, you're waiting for awards, we may ask you questions or clarifications, and we ask that you be available for that. We may ask you to present to different groups that we're working with. We'll ask you to be available for that, and we reserve the right to reject any and all applications, and we can withdraw this offer at any time. So we're going to look at these with our allocation committee. We'll take it to the Utah Homelessness Council, and all factors will be considered before doing awards through that process. Keep in mind that we are a state entity, and anything you submit to us could be requested through the GRAMA process. So if you have anything in your application, anything that's, you know, the secret sauce for your agency, it's very specific to you, you don't want it shared, there is a form you need to fill out that you can see here, and it's also in the RFGA packet. Make sure you fill that out if you don't want your information to be shared. Otherwise, if anybody submits that request and it's approved, we'll provide them the full application. You may be awarded a partial grant. So if we determine that your project should be awarded an amount less than what you've requested, or that the funding requires us to award less than what you requested, that is a possibility, and we'll discuss that with you. And we may contact your local homeless council, the Utah Homeless Network, or our funding body, the Utah Homelessness Council, to get their input, their advice, to have them review things, answer questions for us. So keep that in mind. Make sure you're familiar with those groups. They know who you are. We do require a letter of support from your LHC that we'll talk about later. So hopefully you're already engaged with them. Last for this section, we do have a Q&A page that we prefer to have all of our questions come through. It just makes it easier for us to make sure we're answering everyone's questions, that we're making all those answers publicly available so everybody's getting the same information. You can see the link there, and it's also on the RFGA posting. All those questions need to be to us by December 12th, and then we'll have them all publicly available, finalized by December 13th. So you have enough time to finish up your applications if you haven't done so already, and gives us enough time to prepare for that ending of the RFGA process. So again, link there, please submit all your questions through there, and we'll post all those answers publicly. So before you ask a question, check that, make sure it hasn't already been asked and answered, and we'll get that going for you. Okay, back to Liz.
Sweet. So I'm going to just quickly review the fact sheet that I spoke about a little bit earlier. So give me just a second to pull that up. Okay. So can everyone see the fact sheet?
Lily, we can see it. It's just really small. It looks like it's not in presentation mode.
Okay, I didn't. Well, it's not pertinent that you need to like really see it for the fine print. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that there was a fact sheet. Again, the link will be within both the presentation that I shared and then also on the RFGA website. So basically, there's just going to be a quick overview of the non-congregate shelter money, and then the eligible activities and costs. So things like acquisition costs, demolition costs, hard costs, things like that. You can also see admission and occupancy. You can see there's links within here to the relevant CFR. That can be really helpful too. There's also project requirements that you can see. This is again just a really helpful resource to kind of make sure that you have a good understanding of what we're discussing today in this PowerPoint. And then we have PJ management and oversight. And then that is the fact sheet. So again, it's just a really helpful resource for you to utilize. And without further ado, we are going to give the time over to Amy to talk about the process in Adobe Forms.
Okay, so Russell and Ellie got you all excited about what we're asking you to do. So let's figure out how to actually get in there and get that application complete. So let's look at the website really quick here. And you can see on the website all of those 3 grants that we have open. And we're going to go to our shelter acquisition right there. Okay, that's basically your landing page. Here's the important things that you want to take note of. We've got our announcement tab. There's going to be a link here to that letter of intent right there. Here's the meeting that we obviously are in, so you were able to find it. Contact information down here, and there's that email, important email address. Anyway, all your deadlines are going to be on here. Click on here, you've got your eligibility requirements. Lily went ahead and went over those. Addendum, if we have to change anything on the RFGA, that will be found here. At this point, we do not have any question and answers, as we talked about. Russell talked about submitting those questions and where you can find that. If you click here, that question form is going to come up where you can submit those questions really easy. Go ahead and put your question in there and submit it. And then you can also check under question and answers, this QA page, and that's where those answers are going to be posted. So as Russell mentioned, if you think you've got a question, you can check here and see if it's already been answered, or you can check that fact sheet that Lily talked about before. If those 2 items didn't answer your question, then please go ahead and submit that question on that other link that I just showed you before. So that's where you're going to find your question and answer. So let's go ahead back to the application tab here, and let's talk about what that application looks like. You will see here, there is a link to the actual RFGA. So all of the information that we talked about will be found in the RFGA here, okay? So any of the links, if you're having a hard time finding them, if you need to read through the entire RFGA again to understand some of the things they're talking about, it's going to be available right there, okay? So let me tell you what is an important item that we want to be looking at on the RFGA. It is not that one. Is it the 3rd one? No, we'll try that one. Ah, there we go. Yeah, did everyone see that? Okay. One thing you're going to find on your RFGA is the submission checklist. This is going to be really important. This is going to tell you what things are needed that you need to have ready to go before you submit that application. Kind of have your ducks in a row before you go to that actual grant application and submit it. Okay, you're going to need your unique entity identifier. That's a mouthful, your UEI number. Okay, if you had a DUNS number in the past, you're going to need to get a UEI number.
They can't see the PDF. Do you want to maybe stop sharing and try doing a new share?
Oh, okay, so,
Just at the top there. Sorry to interrupt you.
okay,
So go to new share.
oh, okay,
Go to here
and try that one.
and click share.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes, we can see it now.
Oh, thank you. That's good. I just learned something. Okay, we'll try again. Submission checklist. This is again going to tell you what documents and things you need to have ready to go before we actually go into that application, which I'll show you to have ready. Okay, so unique identity, UEI. It's such a mouthful. Basically, that's going to replace a DUNS number if you have a DUNS number in the past and you have since then not applied for any other federal funding. You can get that UEI number or apply for that on sam.gov. If you have any questions about that process, we could certainly help you through that. You need your EIN. And then again, there's that letter of intent that we're asking you to complete by December 2nd. Okay, the documents that you're going to need include that grant application cover sheet. We're going to do that last. And then you're going to complete the grant application narrative. Those are the questions basically that you're going to answer and tell about your project. Business license or articles of incorporation if they're applicable. 503C letter if applicable if you're a nonprofit. A budget narrative. We're gonna give you a budget template. You're gonna complete it. You're gonna save it. You're not going to upload it with the rest of the documents. As you can see here, we've included an email address. You're gonna make sure you email it to that address once you've submitted that application. And that's so that we can keep that budget template in its original format to be able to use it as we need it, okay? We're also asking for examples of other affordable housing projects, verification of site control, award letters to verify other funding sources, and a local homeless council letter of support dated within the last 60 days, okay? So those things are what you're going to need to have ready to go, and then you'll go in and complete that grant application. So let's see what that looks like from here. Let me think, do I go back to my old share? No.
So go to your. Yeah. and
Oh,
do you
yes.
do a new share?
New share. Do this one. Ow. Thanks for your patience. Oh, then you don't do it. Okay, so we're back here. Everyone can see that. Back to our landing page. Here is our actual application page that we're going to need to complete to submit our documents. As you can see, yes, it's a different color than the other one, sorry. Okay, this is gonna ask you for your organization information. It's gonna ask for that UEI number, federal tax number, and then some other identifying information. Everything that has an asterisk is required, okay? Pretty simple information. At the bottom here, though, is what we want to pay close attention to. These are going to be your attachments, okay? So those things that we talked about on that checklist, those are those documents that you need to have ready to go so that when you come into this grant application, you have them saved somewhere on your computer to be able to click on this and attach that file, okay? So there's that grant application narrative that you will have completed and saved. We'll look at that in a second. This FFATA certification, we'll talk about this. If you'll notice here, there's no link for that budget because you're going to email that once that's submitted. And then there's the link. And again, these three here are required for that non-congregate shelter case management plan, okay? Verification of site control and local homeless council letter of support, okay? Now, it does say if these are going to be different or more than one document, so if you have more than one letter from the your local homeless council, you're going to need to combine them into one document. There's only one attachment link. Okay, if you have any problems with that, we would be happy to help you with that. But again, if you've got more than one site control verification, you're going to need to combine those into one document before going to attach them to be able to do that. And then these are your additional documents, if they're applicable. Same thing, these are not going to be required, okay? But if they are something that you need to attach, make sure those are attached before you hit submit. So you're going to go through this application, you're going to complete all of the required information that it asks for. Then at the bottom, you're going to go down and you're going to start clicking on here and you're going to attach your documents. Once all of those required fields have been populated, it will give you the option to submit. It will give you a button that says submit. Once you hit submit, that means it comes to us and we have received your application, okay? Right after that, I would then recommend going to that email here for this Appendix D budget and going ahead and emailing that budget so that we get that budget and that application at the same time. We'll get it through Adobe. It will be timestamped of when you submitted it, and you will get a confirmation that it was submitted, right? Any questions about that process of how to actually use the grant application? I'm going to bring this up now, if you don't mind. We talked about this yesterday, but if you are not able to get a letter from your local homeless council, and there are reasons why they may be behind, or you said some other reasons.
Yeah, some of them, yeah, capacity.
Capacity, okay.
Can't right now.
It's still asking you to upload something. So you are welcome to tell us, put in a Word document or something that your letter's pending or whatever reason that you don't have that letter. And then you're welcome to upload that in place of the letter. Okay, but there's got to be something uploaded there to be able to submit the application.
I just wanted to say for the additional documents that they're applicable, you'll know that they're applicable based off of your response to some of those narrative questions. So for example, one of the questions is your agency a 501(c)(3)? If so, please attach your 501(c)(3) letter. And so that kind of prompts you to attach that letter there.
Thank you, Lily. Appreciate that. Okay, so let's look at some of the other parts of the application process. So here is going to be your grant application narrative, and they're going to go through this. Lily will go through this, but this is going to be the part that I talked about, that's going to ask you basically about your project. It's just going to be, you're just going to fill it in. There's all of the questions are going to be required, and then you're going to go ahead and save that. That's not a submit thing. That's something that you're going to save your desktop, wherever you want to save it, your documents in a file. And then when it's time to submit that application, you're going to go ahead and attach that form. I don't want that form anymore, right? Oh, okay. Okay, and then let's talk about the FFATA really quickly here. It's a fun word to say. What's a FFATA with you? Is that Hakuna FFATA? What are some other things that are cheesy that you can think of? What is this form and why do we need it? Okay, it's a federal funding accountability and transparency from the Transparency Act, but basically we want to find out if a portion of, if you have a certain amount of federal funding, okay? So you're going to complete the organization name, and then this is what we're asking for. Okay, so make sure you read both of these. It says, does your business have 80% or more of your annual gross revenues in U.S. federal contracts, subcontracts, loans, grants, subgrants, or cooperative agreements? And notice, and it's got to be both. $25 million or more in annual gross revenue from U.S. federal contracts, subcontracts, loans, grants, subgrants, and or cooperative agreements. What I forgot to mention, that's the most important thing at the top here, is this is not required if you are a state agency or a component unit. What's a component unit? Federally or state funded school. So University of Utah, Utah State. Okay. If you have any questions, if you fall under a component unit or a state agency, we have a list of those and we can provide those. Again, if you're a state agency or component unit, you do not need to complete this form. Oh.
You just change it to screen, top left, and it'll show whatever you're showing.
Yeah. it should be good.
We're okay. Okay, sorry, I'm a little behind. Okay, so again, you're a business, you're a nonprofit, you don't fall into a state agency or component unit, and you need to complete this. Remember, it has to be and. You have to meet both of these requirements to say yes. You'll notice no is at the top for a reason, because we see a lot more no's than we do see yeses. So if you are a yes, then you'll complete this part below that talks about your executive compensation, and then you'll sign it. More than likely, you're going to say no, and then do your attestation at the bottom and sign it. Okay, so make sure that that is complete, saved, and you're ready to attach that when you complete that application.
You want to go back to your Safari at the bottom.
Oh, that's what I'm missing. Is that, no, that's not,
Or the Chrome.
oh, you said, okay,
Sorry.
sorry. Remember that, you know, I'm not the most tech savvy person around, okay? And then here's your link to your budget narrative. They're gonna go over the budget narrative, you just pull it up. It comes up as a Excel document, you're gonna complete that budget narrative, you're gonna save it, and then you will, I shouldn't have pulled it up because it's gonna take a minute, sorry. She's gonna look at, anyway, that's what it looks like. It's got 4 tabs. You'll complete each tab or whatever's appropriate, you'll save it. And then once you've submitted that application, you'll go ahead and put it on that email, okay? Now, let me go back to, did I cover everything I needed to cover? Let me think. Oh, let's look at your letter of intent really quickly. Make sure. Letter of intent link is here. This is what it's going to look like when you click on it. There's also a link inside the RFGA. Pretty simple. It's just a Google form. You're going to complete the information that it's asking for. I'm going to scroll really quickly so I can make you dizzy. And then you're going to hit submit at the bottom. But we need to make sure that is submitted by the date so that we know those of you who are interested in completing that application. Do you have any questions about the application process? the one thing I'm just gonna stress is just make sure all of those required documents that we're asking for are ready to go saved. And then go into that actual grant application, complete those boxes, upload, and then you'll be able to submit your information. And we're hoping we get a lot of applications. Okay, then I will turn the time back over to Holly.
Thank you.
You can skip through my slides, sorry.
No.
I did go through.
All right. So now we're going to talk about the narrative question. So the narrative question kind of document is going to be separated into 3 different sections, I believe. So the first one is going to be general project information. So you can see here, you have to select one type of whether you're acquisition, rehabilitation, demolition, or development. And then 1D is a really big kind of bolstery question. It has 4 different components. So you have to identify your specific developer and service provider partnerships, how your project would meet the needs of the qualifying populations associated within your project. We also want to know your plan for the long-term sustainability of your project. And then lastly, we want to see how your proposed project aligns with the goals and objectives of HOME-ARP as outlined in that 24 CFR Part 92 and then HUD Notice CP 2110. So you can see that that's kind of a big question there, and it will just really inform the rest of your answers too with the project narrative. Next, we're going to ask for your case management plan and your budget, which will be emailed, but will be used through the template that's associated with the RFGA packet online. We also want to know kind of your contingency plans in place for the rising construction costs, because that's just the world we're living in right now. And then we want to know any funding specific, what is that? Yeah, it's blocked off. Any funding specific questions that you have. We want to know estimated number of non-congregate shelter emergency beds. We want to know kind of the qualifying population your project is estimated to serve. And then again, any of those partnerships that you have in place or that you will have in place at the time the project begins. The next section that will be covered in the narratives is application information. And so this is really going to be regarding your experience with qualifying populations, administering federal funding, the development and operation of emergency shelters, and then specifically the development and operation of non-congregate shelters. You're not going to be docked per se on any of these questions, and I'll show you the scoring rubric here in a minute. But rather it's just really informative for us to know your experience. But again, you won't be docked if you do not say you have experience in one of these areas or all of these areas. And then lastly, we want to know your experience with conversion plans, as Russell highlighted a little bit earlier. And then the last section that we have is environmental considerations. So this section should be pretty straightforward. It's just a yes, no response option. And these are required by HUD, so they're really general. So is the project currently underway? Have you done environmental reviews? Is the project land a wetland or a floodplain? Does it have any historic significance or any known environmental hazards? And then that's kind of just the narrative in general. We are going to take a quick break. Let's come back at 11:55 and we will go ahead and put a timer on the screen just to make sure that everyone's back in time. I do want to kind of put a plug in. We are going to be talking about the nonprofit capacity funding, but we will be also talking about just general non-congregate stuff as well. So make sure to stick around. rejuvenating break. Whoa. Russell, whoa, what am I doing? Oh. Russell's gonna talk about the non-congregate, or well, the nonprofit capacity funding. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Okay, so a optional piece at the bottom of the application is this nonprofit capacity funding. So this is a separate pot of money than the non-congregate shelter that we showed at the beginning. And this is for. There you go. This is for nonprofits or community housing development organizations. And I made this joke yesterday, I'll make it again. If you don't know what a chodo is, you're not a chodo. It's the best way to know. They're a very specific group of folks. You have to go through special registration for it. But if you're a nonprofit and you would like to be considered for this funding, just fill out the questions at the bottom of the application narrative. And this funding will be in addition to the award you're requesting. The thing about it though, is it's connected to your initial application. So if you're not awarded funding for non-congregate shelter acquisition, you cannot be awarded nonprofit capacity building funding. Vice versa, if you are awarded the non-congregate shelter acquisition, it doesn't mean you'll for sure get this nonprofit capacity funding. They're separate from one another. And it's just to help you have more folks to support the activities you're doing. So we do have some things we're going to ask you to report. So the first is going to be the number of full and part-time employees that you've hired with the funding. Second is the number of trainings and TA that you provided, or that those hired staff provided. And the last one is we just want to know what non-congregate shelter projects that those staff are working on. So pretty simple, nothing too crazy. And then the narrative questions are basically what will you do with this funding? And why is it important? And would the project be able to run without the funding? So just trying to get a good feel. We want to fund the best possible projects and we want to give them the best possible supports. So this is still competitive, but it is separate than the rest of the application for the non-congregate shelter acquisition. Any questions on that? It's very unique. It's just in this HOME-ARP funding, but an exciting opportunity for folks.
Right. So I'm going to be talking about the scope of work, which is attachment B on the RFTA packet. And so this will be a really helpful resource for you. But I'm just going to quickly highlight three different components within the packet scope of work. So the first one that I'll cover is responsibilities. So you must complete the project as defined in the application because it was one within the application that we improved, and then also it was the one approved by the Utah Homeless Council or UHC. Secondly, you must comply with HOME-ARP requirements during the restricted use period established in the HOME-ARP notice. And these are different for new construction versus rehabilitation and acquisition only. And so there are going to be different requirements there. That is on the fact sheet that I showed you a little bit earlier today. And then there are several other responsibilities that I didn't want to take the time to highlight just because I know we want to kind of release you in a few minutes here. But you are also responsible for the other responsibilities as outlined in the RFTA packet. The next point I want to highlight is that you must submit reporting documentation to your assigned DWS OHS staff. So upon getting awarded this funding, you will get a contract owner that will be over your kind of contract on the contracts team within DWS. That's a lot of contracts. Sorry. And then you'll also get a program specialist within the Office of Homeless Services that will be there to support you as well. But basically what will happen once you get awarded and you have that assigned staff to help you, you need to submit the documentation to your program specialist based off the schedule provided below. So we have you submit documentation quarterly. And so we have one first, second, third, and fourth quarters with associated dates listed there. And then we also ask that you support report documentation annually. So this is the full year's data and it will be pulled at the same time as your fourth quarter data. And it's due July 15th. But in addition to the other reporting documentation, it will be, a narrative report will also be required. So that's kind of the difference between the quarter reports and the annual report. And just as a side note, I think this is pretty explanatory, but just to highlight again, that you must report on the content that we covered on slide 14, 35, and then any of the other additional reporting requirements outlined in the RFJ packet. And then the last component of the scope of work that I wanted to highlight, and Russ will talk a little bit more about the budget in a second, is of course the budget. So the grantee shall abide by all invoicing and reimbursement requirements that we outlined in the scope of work. So attachment B. And then within that, we ask you to adhere to the approved budget that you submitted via that email. And that is Appendix C. And then we ask that any claims for reimbursement of expenditures will be submitted online through web grants, which is our grant management system that OHS uses. And then lastly, any changes to the budget must be approved by your program specialist and the Office of Homeless Services in general prior to the expenditure date. And then go ahead.
All right, so the budget that you're gonna submit separately in an Excel via the OHS RFGA email is pretty simple. So I thanked them yesterday, I'll thank them again. Salt Lake City RDA is the basis for this budget. It's a template based on their template. So it hopefully looks familiar to you if you're from the Salt Lake area. But it's pretty simple, pretty clean. It asks for a lot of information that you've already given us, but having it here just makes the application review process a lot easier for us. So thank you for doing that. But it's gonna have you do the project, the number of beds in the project. So bed, if you're not familiar, is just number of individuals that that project has the capacity to serve. It's gonna have you list the funding sources that you either have or are anticipating to have, and then a breakdown of exactly how those sources will be used through those different broad categories that we'll dive into in the two other tabs on the sheet. That will give us a cost per bed, and then we have the timeline at the bottom. So just a clean overview on the first tab, and then the second tab gets into some specifics on the operating expenses. So one struggle that projects may have when applying for this is just acquisition, rehabilitation, and construction money. This is not operation of a non-congregate facility money. So you do need to identify how you're going to pay for the ongoing operation. And that's what's going to be highlighted here is how much that's going to be how much that will be costing you, how much debt servicing you'll need to support that, if any. And then your application should reflect how the rest of the funding is going to be obtained to actually operate the non-congregate shelter. So you'll see here it has 4 spots for those loans. If you need more spots, let me know through that email or through the Q&A, and we'll get you a sheet with more, and hopefully 5's enough for all these projects. And then the last tab is the actual development, the construction, the rehabilitation, the acquisition. So you can see here, it gets into pretty good detail. It gets into the very specific line items. We know this is just an estimate, this is a budget, but it gives us a good idea for exactly how much things are going to cost and what portion of the cost that these funds will be supporting. So put the numbers that you have, you know, if they need to change down the line, we can always work with you on those, but we want to get a really clean and clear picture for exactly, you know, what you're anticipating to be doing for these projects. Any questions on that? I know, you know, this is one of the harder things probably of the application is coming together with these numbers, and we're here to help if you need anything. Cool.
Sweet. So I'm going to be talking about the scoring rubric that I highlighted earlier today. And that is going to be attachment C within the RFGA packet. And again, this is just a really helpful resource for you all. As you can see, it kind of breaks down the different scoring kind of criteria. So what does the answer look like for scoring a 1? Obviously, you're going to want to score in that higher bracket. So for like 1B, you want to score in that 4 to 5 bracket, and it will outline what we're specifically looking for to kind of rate your question 4 or 5. So I would definitely use this as you are writing your responses or reading over your responses to make sure that you have covered everything. And then lastly, though, you'll notice that some of these, most of these will have kind of the higher scoring bracket include if you don't have experience, for example, just because, as I highlighted earlier, we're not going to dock you points on some of those experience-based questions. That will just be a helpful kind of resource for us to base your application off of. So you'll see that some of those questions regarding experience, you'll still score the higher bracket if you justify your responses. And that's one thing that I really wanted to highlight as well, as several of the questions have you justify your response. So make sure that you fully articulate your justification because that is within each of the scoring criteria as well. And then as far as like the scoring rubric goes for the non-congregate shelter versus the nonprofit capacity funding, there are 70 points available for the non-congregate shelter application. And then there's 25 points available in the nonprofit capacity funding application. I do really want to stress though, these scorings are completely separate and independent from one another. So Russell highlighted that these applications are going to be looked at separately. They'll just kind of inform each other. So for example, if you do get awarded the non-congregate shelter money, and you did also apply for the nonprofit money, we'll kind of look at those two I can't say that word right now together, and then we'll see about kind of where you fall in line in terms of funding. And then lastly, if you are unable to receive a letter of support from your LHC, we really still want you to receive partial points. As Amy highlighted, we do ask that you still submit something, as it is a required attachment to submit the RFGA. And so this will just basically be a justification document outlining why you weren't able to get an LHC letter of support. And I'll turn it over for the terms and conditions to Amy.
Okay, we're almost there. This is the most exciting part of the whole presentation, are the terms and conditions. Okay, if you are awarded grant funding, you will receive your agreement packet or your grant package, and in it is going to be a terms and conditions, and we call it the Department of Workforce Services Grants Terms and Conditions. It's 11 pages. We're not going to go over 11 pages today, but just to let you know, you're going to be responsible for everything that is in the terms and conditions. So when you do get that grant package, make sure that you read them. I know 11 pages is a lot, but again, you're going to be responsible for everything that's in them. I'm just going to highlight some important things that you need to be thinking about beforehand. Conflict of interest. We want to make sure that you don't have a conflict of interest, or if you think about it and you've got one, that you bring it to our attention so we can help you get it remedied. What constitutes a conflict of interest? Sorry, chew up my mint. Okay, make sure that none of your owners, directors, officers, employees are also employees of DWS or the state of Utah. Okay, same thing if you hire a subcontractor, make sure that none of them have that same conflict of interest. Okay, again, if this comes up, you're going to make sure that you let us know so we can help you through that process to make sure that that is remedied. Also that now your owners, directors, officers, or employees working under this agreement are relatives of an employee or an employee of DWS. What is a relative? Spouse, child, stepchild, parent, sibling, aunt, uncle, niece, nephew, first cousin, mother-in-law, father-in-law, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, grandparent, or grandchild. So it's pretty broad of what's considered a relative, okay? And then also make sure you're not going to use those grant funds to make any payments to an organization which has some things in common with you, the grantee. Owners or partners who directly or indirectly own 10% or more of the voting interest of the organization, directors, officers, or others with authority to establish policies and make decisions for the organization. So those are the things that are going to constitute a conflict of interest. And again, if you think you're going to have an issue with this, bring it to our attention right away and we can help you get that remedied. Indemnity. Basically, this means that you are liable, not liable. Maybe I should, that really is an I, it blends it. That you, the grantee, are liable for everything that happens under that grant, that DWS is not responsible or liable, and that you are taking on the responsibility. Basically, that's what that says for the duration of the grant, and that you will hold, you will not hold DWS liable. But that's what you're agreeing to, and that's what the indemnity means. Amendments, if you need to make any changes, once that grant agreement is in place, it has to be through the amendment process, and that means that it has to be approved by you and by DWS and signed in writing and be in writing, okay? So if you need to make some changes, that's not something that you can just do. That has to be a process, and it has to be approved and signed. Just to make sure you know that you are not able to impose any fees on any fees upon the clients you're providing services to under the agreement, including any electronic payment fees. Okay. We say no to human subject research. That kind of sounds really scary. I think of Frankenstein or something, but that's not what it is. But just make sure you're not conducting any non-exempt human subject research. And there's some code there if you need to look that up. That involves DWS or any individuals receiving your services. Any of the program reporting that we talked about, or any of the evaluations we're asking you to complete, are not considered human subject research. We talked a lot about your grantee responsibilities. Russell and Lily talked about, making sure in that scope of work that those things are outlined, those reporting requirements or things. So just a reminder that you are going to be responsible for those things that are outlined in that agreement or that contract when you get it. And we're asking to remind you that you are following those. Okay. If you do need to subcontract or subgrant out some of the work, just to remind you, you have to have consent to do that. So you can't just assume that that's okay to do. So first part is you need to get consent, make sure it's okay and in writing with DWS. And then if that is approved, make sure that you realize that you're still the number one person responsible for whatever happens under that grant. Okay. And so whatever work or whatever that you have subcontracted out, you're still the one responsible, and let the subcontractor know they're also responsible, but ultimately you're responsible to meet all those requirements. Monitoring, there will be monitoring. As we saw earlier, Russell and Lily talked about, some things that you're going to be turning in, some reports. All of these grants, any kind of grant that you receive, there will be monitoring. Your program specialist will work through that monitoring process with you. But monitoring could look like the reports that we ask for. It could look like a site visit. Anything that we ask for, maybe to look at your finances, things like that. Anything that we ask for, we're not going to get you up in the middle of the night in your jammies to ask you for something. Will take place during normal business hours. And then why do we monitor? To make sure that you're successful with the project. We want to help you be successful. So if there is something that comes up, we're going to help you work through, to help fix the situation or to get into compliance. Monitoring's not a punitive thing, and we don't want you to look at it as a punitive thing. We want to make sure you're meeting grant requirements. We're meeting federal requirements and things that we are working together to be successful. Nobody likes to talk about a grant termination, but sometimes it does happen. Why? There are some reasons. Termination for cause. Maybe you were in violation, you didn't meet your monitoring, or you didn't turn in your reports or whatever. We will give you notice. You're not just going to get terminated. We give you at least 10 days notice, sometimes a month, depends on what we've negotiated, but we will give you writing and then time to make sure that those things are remedied. And then if we're not able to remedy them, then we may end up with a termination. Immediate termination happens if maybe some of the services that you're providing, if somebody is in danger, one of the clients are in danger, something like that. Fraud, if there's something like liability, something like that, then we may do an immediate termination. No cause termination, maybe ended up with other funding streams, maybe the funding ran out, something like that. We'll give 30 days prior notice. And then termination due to non-appropriation of funds, reduction of funds, or changes in law. Maybe the legislature pull back the funding. Sometimes that happens. We'll let you know. That will be in writing, and we'll give you plenty of notice. And then if the funding does end, we'll make sure that all of those submitted invoices and things are reimbursed up into that point. We're not going to leave you hanging. Okay. Suspension of work. There may be something that's out of compliance, something that audit has found or something, and we're not looking at termination, but we may need to suspend whatever you're doing with those grant funds at that up until whatever is resolved. So we're not going to terminate, but we may have to suspend work, have to suspend something until that's remedied. Agreement renewal, any agreement renewals are at the sole discretion of DWS, and just to let you know, this is a 2-year competitive grant, and there are not any renewals available. And we're asking you as a grantee to also make sure in compliance with just all generally applicable state and federal laws. What does that look like for a business or a nonprofit with employees? Fair Labor Standards Act, Equal Opportunity Employment Act. Make sure you've got your workers' compensation in a row. Make sure you're paying your unemployment insurance. Those types of things. Make sure that information is readily available for your employees to see. If you need to get your posters up on the wall, we can help you get that. But just make sure you read through that and understand what is expected of you to be in compliance with those state and federal laws. Again, if you're an operating business, you should be in compliance with these things. If you do have to do some work on a state premises, probably not in this case, but if something happens and you need to do some of your stuff on in a state building, we just ask that anybody under the grant that may be working in the building follows all protocol that any state employee would have to, including upholding that DWS substance abuse and drug free workplace standard. Okay, remain in authorized areas, those types of things. If you do have any job openings under this project that come open with your organization or agency during that grant agreement, they do need to be posted with the department on jobs.utah.gov. That is a really easy process, and we can help you with that. It sounds like based on with case management portion, we may be looking at serving your clients you may be serving some underage and some vulnerable populations. So more than likely, we're going to include a code of conduct form, and this is something that the employees need to complete that basically outlines working with minors and vulnerable populations. And then we'll also look at a background check form. Okay? If you don't, we'll ask about your current background check policy in place, and then if you don't have one, we'll ask you to look at what you're going to implement, and then we've got some background forms that need to be signed. That being said, those need to be available. So if we come out to do a monitoring and we have determined those code of conduct and background check forms need to be completed, they'll need to be available for our monitoring staff to view. Okay. You also need to make sure you have a grievance procedure established for those clients that you are serving or providing services or goods to under this grant. So that if something comes up and they want to file a grievance regarding the eligibility process or the services they receive, that they can bring that to you, and it can also be forwarded to DWS if needed. So make sure that that's available. And then you are going to be housing personally identifiable information. And we want to make sure that you're aware of your responsibility to protect that client record or that client information. And then if there is any kind of a breach, we need to be notified immediately. And that, again, it's your liability and your responsibility to make sure we're keeping all of that information confidential. Required insurance. Okay, as a grantee, you have 30 days after the award, the date of the award of the agreement, to get us an updated insurance certificate. That means during the entire term of the grant agreement, you as a grantee will provide certification of insurance. And it needs to be, you need to maintain and carry uninterrupted insurance for that entire period. What does that insurance look like? You need to have commercial general liability insurance from an insurance company authorized to do business in the state of Utah. Okay. You must have no coverage that includes no less than $1 million per person per occurrence and $3 million aggregate per occurrence. Any non-government agency must add the state of Utah DWS as an additional insured with notice of cancellation. Okay. If you're going to be using any kind of automobiles in the during the grant as part of your business or part of construction or whatever, and you need to make sure you have commercial automobile liability insurance. That is a mouthful. I am sorry. With the same liability must be $1 million per occurrence. Geez, combined single limit. Okay. And then if you're going to be employing any doctors, dentists, social workers, mental health, you're also going to need the appropriate insurance to cover those professionals with the $1 million per occurrence and $3 million aggregate. And then any other insurance that is appropriate to your type of business or agency, including that workers' compensation that we talked about, okay? And then, once you add us as the additional insured, we will get notice of a cancellation. We'll be reaching out to you if there's any kind of insurance issues. But again, we need that insurance information with those required, required items within 30 days of the agreement. Okay, financial reporting and audit requirements. We're asking that you also follow any kind of state and federal reporting and audit requirements. They went over those. Billings and payments, they talked to you, Lily, and Russell talked to you about how you're going to submit your invoices. We are asking that with the closeout of the fiscal year, that we want to have them by the 15th of July, no late. No, does that say that? The DWS receive billing for services for the month of June, no later than July 15th due to our fiscal year end. So be aware of, year-end closeouts and some of the things that we need so that we're able to pay those for you. There may be some payment withholdings. We talked about, budget changes and things that you needed approved to get approved. If we see something that comes through that's an invoice that maybe you didn't get approved, we may have to withhold payment if it wasn't something that was approved. Okay, so we want to make sure we get those things approved before, so we don't have to withhold any payment. DDEVs will reimburse administrative expenses as long as it's on your budget and you followed the things on the budget as opposed to direct expenses. It's outlined here on what category to put your items in. If you do have a federally approved negotiated indirect cost rate or a NICRA, we need to have a copy of that approved letter along with the information on the base rate used to distribute your indirect costs. So we make sure that we put that through finance, and then we have to fill out some other paperwork when we do your agreement to make sure we've got all of that ready to go. And again, changes in budget, make sure that if you think you need a change in budget, that you have reached out to that program specialist and we've got everything signed off so that there is not a problem when you go back to submit those invoices. Okay, that was a lot of information. Again, it's 11 pages. You're still responsible for everything on there, but I wanted to make sure and scare you a little bit and highlight those items that we're looking for on those terms and conditions. Thank you, and I'm going to turn this time back over to Lily.
Sweet, thank you, Amy. All right, do we have any questions, comments, concerns, excitement that anybody wants to chat about or we can address for y'all?
I think all of the applicants have actually left.
Oh, okay, perfect. Well, sounds good. We will, of course, be willing to answer any questions that people submit via the Q&A form or that OHS email. Without further ado, I do want to just highlight that we have some contact information here. So Russell Goodman will be your program manager that will be administering those HOME-ARP non-congregate funds. And then we have two contract analysts over this pot of money, and that is Chloe Norvell and Amy Lowe. Thank you again for joining us. Russell, do you have anything else you want to add? Okay, sweet. Talk to y'all later.